Vamos a la playa. If you've looked at a map of South America, you know that there's an odd little strip of Chile, which completely blocks Bolivia from the Pacific Ocean. But here's the thing, that little piece of Chile actually once belonged to Bolivia, so that begs the question, why does Chile have it today? How did Bolivia lose its coastline? To figure that out, we need to go back. Even before colonization, Bolivia was never really prime real estate. Surrounded by harsh desert, thick rainforest, and useless grassland, most people just settled in the mountains of the Andean Plateau. So naturally, when the Spanish came rolling in with their foreign European diseases and guns, they did the same. But then this created problems when deciding the borders for their viceroyalties, like here in the Atacama Desert. Most borders were drawn based on where people lived, but well, nobody lived in the desert. It was just sand and rock. So the Spanish just didn't bother. Hey, what's the point? No one even lives here and they're all under us anyways. It's not like they'll revolt and suddenly start caring about borders or whatever. What, is there something on my face? Mierda. And so, when the Spanish were eventually kicked out from the Americas in the early 19th century, Bolivia was finally free to clean up the mess that the Spanish had left them. They were broke, had an ethnic divide, and had little to no infrastructure. But hey, at least they had a coastline. At least technically? As you'd expect, the Spanish actually never marked out who owned this area, meaning that Bolivia wasn't the only one who had their flag planted on this land. Enter Chile, who also had an eye on this barren, rocky strip of sand. But why? As it turned out, the Atacama was actually a lot more than just empty desert. It was rich with valuable resources, namely guano, which is like condensed bird and bat poop, a valuable fertilizer, and saltpeter, or potassium nitrate, another fertilizer and component in explosives. With both nations fresh out of independence and in desperate need for money, both suddenly became extremely invested in the desert, raising tension. But luckily, a common enemy made them briefly put their differences aside. After joining together to beat up Spain in the Chincha Island War, both sides agreed to meet in the middle and split the desert along the 24th parallel, and also agreeing to make this area a zone of mutual benefit, where both of them could tax resource extraction in the area. Now, everyone was happy. Well, except for Bolivia. As we iterated earlier, Bolivia was broke, meaning that even though there was an abundance of valuable saltpeter and bird poop on their land, they didn't have the necessary infrastructure, resources, or experience to go get them in the first place. But guess who did have them? And so most of the companies and people who worked on the Bolivian side of the border were Chilean, meaning that the country who got the most out of the resources was Chile. And so in an attempt to make things more fair, the two countries sat down once again in 1874, where it was stated that Bolivia would be able to take 100% of the profits from extractions on their land, and crucially, they would not raise taxes on Chilean mining operations in their nation. Finally, everyone was happy. I'm gonna tax them. Wait, what? You just said that you wouldn't tax them? I'm gonna tax them. We had a conversation a moment ago that said you wouldn't tax. I'm still gonna tax them. We literally had a treaty. Hold on a second. I will. I literally have your signature right here. You agreed to this. This is your signature. Nah, mis huevos! On the 23rd of February 1878, Bolivia established the famous 10 centavo tax on the Compañía de Salitres y Ferrocarril de Antofagasta. In Bolivia's defense, it was hit with quite a heavy economic depression in the 1870s, and a recent tsunami off their coast left them in dire need to rebuild. But Chile didn't give a carajo. It too was feeling the effects of an economic depression, but breaking their previous treaty was just plain foul. And so, seeing this as a justification to steal Bolivia's nitrate and guano reserves, but mostly to protect the interests of the Chilean nation, Chile struck first. With only an army of about 2,000 men, Chile marched into the Bolivian port city of Antofagasta, and 2 days later gained control of the entire Bolivian Atacama, all with suspiciously zero resistance. But Bolivia had been secretly hiding an ace up its sleeve: Peru. Wait, hold on, when did this happen? As it turned out, back in 1873, Peru and Bolivia both signed a mutual defense agreement, as both of these nations weren't too fond of Chile. And thus, in April 1879, Peru, albeit reluctantly, was dragged into the conflict when Chile formally declared war on both Bolivia and it. The bloody war that ensues has many names. Some refer to it as the 10 Cents War, as a reference to the 10 cents tax placed by Bolivia. Some called it the Saltpeter War, referencing the nitrates that sparked the war, but I prefer to call it by its much cooler name, La Guerra del Pacífico, or the Now, I know my whole thing is oversimplifying things, but I'm gonna have to oversimplify this even further if I want to get this video out. But if you are actually interested in the nitty-gritty aspects of the actual war section of the war, then I recommend watching these videos, which I'll link in the description. Just a heads up, some of them are in Spanish, so you might have to use YouTube's auto-translate feature for that. But first of all, let's establish each of the players in this war. Bolivia and Peru had the advantage of 2 combined armed forces, and the fact that Peru's manpower already outnumbered Chile's meant that they had the clear advantage in numbers. However, most of Peru's army consisted of the indigenous Quechua people, meaning that numbers didn't really mean anything when you didn't know what your teammate was saying. This, alongside the fact that Chile had previous experience due to recent wars, meant that Chile had a more consistent army and greater expertise when it came to warfare. And it was due to this expertise that Chile realized that to win on land, they had to first win at sea. The first major battle in the Pacific happened off the coast of Iquique, where the Chileans had attempted a blockade. This was quickly crushed by the Peruvian ironclad Huáscar, and the Peruvians won. But on the same day at the Battle of Punta Gruesa, Peru's only other ironclad, the Independencia, was sunk after being outmaneuvered by the wooden Covaronga, hitting an undersea rock and sinking, thus a Chilean victory. And a few months later at the Battle of Angamos, the Huáscar was finally captured, and thus the Chileans had successfully captured the sea. With the ocean secured, the Chileans turned to face the Allies on land, starting with the Peruvian province of Tarapacá. This was a crucial campaign as this province was a large center of guano and nitrate extractions, and by taking it, Chile would be able to heavily punish the Allies economically. And so they did. Eager to keep the train going, Chile initiated their invasion of the Peruvian provinces of Tacna and Arica, culminating in the Battle of Tacna, and won. In fact, the massive loss inflicted on the Allies was so great that Bolivia was forced to withdraw their remaining troops to hunker down in the capital of La Paz, ultimately exiting the war and breaking the treaty, leaving Peru to fend for itself. But Chile wasn't stalling any longer. They were going to shoot to kill, right at the heart of Peru, their capital, Lima. And so, after growing their manpower and strength, Chile launched its largest attack, the Campaign of Lima. With a force of 40,000 men, they broke through Peruvian defenses and finally entered Lima on January 17, 1881. This didn't exactly end the war, however, as Peru continued to fight for a few more years. Well, when I say Peru, I'm referring to a bunch of de facto governments that popped up, clashing with Chilean forces with guerrilla resistance. This continued even when Peru officially signed for peace with Chile in 1883 with the Treaty of Ancón. But aside from that, on April 4th, 1884, Bolivia finally signed its own peace agreement with Chile in the Treaty of Valparaíso, officially ending the War of the Pacific. So, now all that was over, what did Bolivia lose? Well, its coastline, and guano and nitrates. In the end, Chile took territory from both Peru and Bolivia, including all of the Bolivian Atacama, leaving it landlocked. And it's still salty to this day. They even have a national holiday commemorating the loss of their coast, and are also one of the only landlocked countries in the world to still operate a navy, training on Lake Titicaca. To this day, they haven't given up, even bringing it up with the International Court of Justice in 2018, but ultimately failed to go anywhere. But though the territory has been held by Chile for over a century now, Bolivia still holds hope that one day it'll be able to peacefully regain its access to the sea. Hello, first of all, if you guys like that video, please give a thumbs up and leave a comment below because your comments mean a lot to me, and if you're new here and you're feeling a bit generous, please consider giving me a subscribe. I just want to say I'm so sorry for leaving you guys for 3 whole months. I think it's almost 4 months at this point, but I am back. I know I'm back, not with a bang, but I am back, and I plan to be back. Hopefully until I'm not back, but let's just say I have a lot more planned to make it up to you guys and also to make it up to the YouTube algorithm. But yeah, so that means I have a lot more work to do, and so I will hopefully see you guys in the next one. Bye bye.